Welcome to the Soul Forge, a place of silent mystery, quiet contemplation, and outright mayhem. Join your host, Sean Vanderloo, as he guides you through the adventures of living. Together, we'll talk about life and love, sex and dating, joy and heartache, memories and loss, and so much more. Don't worry, it's not nearly as pretentious as it sounds. Get ready for life, the universe, and everything on the Soul Forge.
Well, hey everybody. Welcome to episode 34 of the Soul Forge podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vanderloo. But you knew that already, didn't you? Yes, you did. So what are we going to talk about this week? I've been racking my brains trying to think about what to talk about. What's new and exciting, what's going on, and not a whole heck of a lot, actually. So I thought back to the bonus episode that I gave you earlier in the week, episode 33, where I spoke to Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemecek.
Hey, it's Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek.
I listened to his new podcast today, actually, The Trek Files, the debut episode, which we were talking about on our conversation. Not an interview. It wasn't really an interview. It was more of a conversation. It was a chat. It was a discussion. And then I got to thinking, that was a really good podcast. I enjoyed it. But do people really know who Larry Nemecek is? He's Star Trek famous, but is he really? So it got me wondering about all the famous people that I've met over the years and the various levels of fame that entails for these people. So I started the Rusted Robot podcast, I believe it was January 1st, 2014, and I was on a different podcast's discussion group on Facebook, and Larry Nemecek happened to be there, which I was surprised by. And I said, wow, I'd really like to have you on the podcast one day. And he sent me a private message and saying, well, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast. So he was actually the first famous person that I spoke to on the Rusted Robot, episode 8. Then he came back for episode 49, and this past weekend I released the episode that you heard on episode 33 here on episode 184 over there. But how famous is Larry Nemecek? I actually asked people. I said, I've got an interview this week with a famous author, and who's that? They all said. And I said, it's Larry Nemecek, and they're like, I don't know who that is. And then I asked some Star Trek people, and some of them knew who he was, but some of them didn't, because he's not an actual actor for Star Trek. He wrote some books about it. He was on I think he was on Star Trek Continues, which was a fan film on YouTube. He's semi-famous. He's Star Trek famous if you're going to do a deep dive. I have enjoyed his first episode of his first podcast. He is doing it in conjunction with the people from the Mission Log podcast, who actually I've spoken to on Twitter once or twice. So John Champion and Ken Ray, are they famous? I don't know how famous they are, because you see, my issue is I'm deep dive here into the Star Trek world, but not everybody else is. And have they been in other things? Maybe. I know that Ken Ray does a Mac podcast. He says he's been doing it for about 10 years every day. I've never listened to the thing. But it's not something that I go for, but maybe he's famous. Maybe he's not. Rod Roddenberry, Gene Roddenberry's son, is the producer of both of these podcasts. Who's Rod Roddenberry? Who's Gene Roddenberry? Well, Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in the 60s, and Rod is his son. I've never spoken to Rod. But who are the famous people that you've talked to in your life, or seen anyway? I've actually come across quite a few, maybe quite a few. I don't really know. I'm here up in the north, the land that culture forgot, so I don't get the opportunity to meet or see a lot of famous people by chance. But who have I come across? Well, I remember when I was a kid, I took my brother Curtis to see a concert, maybe? I can't remember what it was. It was a long time ago. Maybe I was 12 or 13, and this person came to the local high school, and somehow we got tickets, and we went to whatever performance it was by somebody named Charlotte Diamond. I don't know who that is. I was going to look her up on Wikipedia or something before the podcast. But anyway, just some person. Actually, you know what? I'm going to look it up right now on my phone while we're speaking. I'm going to see if she's anywhere on the internet. Charlotte Diamond songs. Okay, so she is somebody. A Canadian children's singer. She's recorded 12 albums, including the Juno Award-winning 10 Carat Diamond. Some of her most popular songs include 4 Hugs a Day, I Am a Pizza, Octopus, Each of Us is a Flower, and May There Always Be Sunshine. She's also recorded songs in Spanish and French, and she's toured in Canada and the US. And I guess she's still alive, and she was born in 1945, so she's 72 years old. And have you heard about her? Maybe, maybe not, but she was a children's singer. She was a children's singer, so I guess that's why we got to see her perform. So that was my first brush with fame. I think I got a autographed picture from her and whatnot, if I remember back in the day. What else? Who else have I met? When I was 19, I went to an Alanis Morissette concert. So I was in the same breathing space as her. I never got to talk to her. I had a huge obsession with her, but no actual interaction. But I did get to see her with my own eyes, not through a camera or on a picture or a video or whatever. So that was cool. Also in North Bay, when I lived there, I saw Amanda Marshall in concert. I saw Kim Stockwood in concert. Kim Stockwood was actually performing at the bar called The Zoo, so I was really close to her. And I was even closer in that same bar another night to the group called The Wild Strawberries. I was maybe 3 feet from the lead singer, some pretty girl I can't remember the name of. Are those famous people? Not really. You never hear about Kim Stockwood or Amanda Marshall or The Wild Strawberries anymore. You do hear from or about Alanis Morissette from time to time, so that's pretty cool. And isn't it ironic? When I worked at the call center, I used to take phone calls for, I think it was, well, there was a few different companies I worked for. Quest Wireless, Nextel/Sprint, and I once received a phone call from Mo Vaughn. Now, he was a big-time baseball player back in the day, and I believe that it was the same Mo Vaughn, but I'm not 100% certain. I don't know that it was the actual guy or not. I asked him and he said he was, but he could have been lying. I don't know. So there was that. Wendell Clark, I think he was the captain for the Toronto Maple Leafs back in the day, and he came here maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I got an autograph picture from him, and in my phone I've got a picture of the two of us together as I was getting the autograph, so I actually met him. Not that I'm a hockey fan or a sports fan of any kind, but that was somebody famous. When I went to university, we had an English class, and there was a playwright named Thompson Highway. He was Native American. No, what's the proper term? First Nations? Anyway, he wrote a play that we studied called Dry Lips Ought to Move to Kapuskasing. He came and did a talk, and I had a copy of the play because we were studying it, and I got an autograph from him, and we had a quick conversation. So I met Thompson Highway, a somewhat famous Canadian playwright. I have speaking of people of Canadian descent who write stuff, Robert J. Sawyer.
Hi, my name's Robert J. Sawyer. I'm an award-winning science fiction writer, and you're listening to the Rusted Robot Podcast. Don't forget to follow them on Twitter.
And who's that? He's a semi-famous Canadian author of science fiction. He was on episode 13 of the Rusted Robot Podcast. So if you ever want to go ahead and listen to my conversation with him, there it is. Now, he's my favorite Canadian, well, almost probably my all-time, he's probably one of my favorite sci-fi authors of all time. So I reached out to him, I think on Twitter or on Facebook, and I said, hey, would you like to be on an interview? And I was excited and nervous, and it turns out the guy's full of himself. If you go listen to the episode, he's like, oh, this is my, 300 and something podcast that I've been on. I've been on this many radio shows. He keeps track of all this stuff, and he keeps talking up all his famous friends and whatnot. So I wasn't too impressed with that, but it was still cool to talk to him. Still love his books and whatnot, but he just wasn't what I expected. And then there's a comic book artist named Sina Grace.
Hi, this is Sina Grace, writer and artist for Burn the Orphanage, and you are listening to the Rusted Robot Podcast. I hope you're having fun.
I wouldn't say he's really famous or not, but we spoke to him on, I believe, episode maybe 19 of the podcast, somewhere under 20 episodes, maybe 17, maybe 19, somewhere around there. Not really sure. Can't remember. I didn't look it up. Doesn't matter. It's in the early days of the Rusted Robot. So on that podcast, I've spoken to Larry Nemechek, Sina Grace, and Robert J. Sawyer. So that was pretty awesome. And here in town, we have what's called the Northern Ontario Expo, or Timmins Comic Con. And we've had some famous guests here. The first year of the show, Lou Ferrigno was here. He played the Hulk back in the 70s. I didn't actually get an autograph or talk to the guy, but I was in the same room, no more than 10 feet from him. The following year, John Schneider came, and he played Bo Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard back in the day. A few years later, Chris Holden Reed, who was an actor on Lost Girl, he came here and I talked to him.
Hey there, I'm Chris Holden Reed from Lost Girl, and you are listening to the Rusted Robot Podcast. Enjoy.
Got a sound bite from him for the podcast. And 2 years ago, Marina Sirtis came to town. If you don't know who that is, she played Counselor Deanna Troi in Star Trek The Next Generation. Kind of had a bit of a funny interaction with her. That year, I dressed up as a Borg, which is a cybernetic being that basically shoots little microbes into your body and turns you into one of them. So it's kind of like a cybernetic zombie. So anyway, I'm dressed up in my Borg outfit, and she's standing there talking to somebody, and on the show, The Next Generation, she played Counselor, but she was half human and half betazoid. And a betazoid is somebody who can read your mind. So I'm in my Borg outfit, and I walk up to her, and I say, "Species, betazoid, you will be assimilated," because that's what the Borg would say on the show. And she just kind of looked at me, turned to her friend and said, "Oh, that was different, ha ha ha," and she walked away. So, needless to say, I didn't go get her autograph or a soundbite from her, because that was kind of like, whatever. She wasn't very impressed. I thought it was funny, but she didn't. So there was that. Who else? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, well, probably closer to 5, my wife at the time, Bridget, and I were in Sudbury having dinner at a restaurant, and the waiter comes up to us and says, "Look who's over there at the table. It's some famous people." And I'm like, "Who is it?" And he's like, "It's Dominic Purcell and Annalyn McCord." I'm like, "What?" And it dawned on me. Dominic Purcell played Lincoln on Prison Break, and he's right now on DC's Legends of Tomorrow TV show as Rory. So I guess he was filming a movie there, and his girlfriend at the time was Annalyn McCord, and she played somebody on the reboot of Beverly Hills 90210. So they were in the same breathing space as me. Back in 2014, we went to Fan Expo in Toronto, and I saw a bunch of famous people, such as Bruce Campbell, Michael Rooker, can't remember who else, but Stan Lee and Patrick Stewart were both there. We were in the same breathing room as them. I didn't actually get to see them because there were so many people, and the lineup for their autographs were so long you couldn't even get over there. But still, in the same breathing space, so that was pretty cool. Also at that same show, we actually stood in line for 2 people. We wanted to get autographs from both of them. I guess Bridget wanted to more than I did, but we got some sound bites from them. We met Stephen Amell.
Hey, this is Stephen Amell, and you're listening to the Rusted Robot Podcast. I'm hanging with Sean and Bridget right now. They're telling me all about podcasts and general geekery and fun times in Northern Ontario, so keep listening.
Who's a Canadian actor, and he plays the Arrow on the Arrow TV show. And so we got him to do a soundbite, and he autographed some picture that Bridget had purchased. And we also went and met Edward James Olmos, who played Admiral Adama in Battlestar Galactica. He's been in a million different TV shows. He played a bit character in the original Blade Runner movie from '82. He's done a bunch of stuff, and we got a soundbite from him as well.
Hi, this is Admiral Adama, Battlestar Galactica, saying, "You're listening to the Rusted Robot Podcast. Think about it."
So that was very, very exciting to meet some famous people and have some interactions. I don't know how really significant any of those are. It's cool to get them on your podcast and do some conversations with them and whatnot. Get some sound bites. I also had a Twitter interaction with Will Wheaton, who played Wesley Crusher on Star Trek The Next Generation as well. So he commented on one of my tweets, and I think Anthony Montgomery did as well, or he liked one of my tweets, and Anthony Montgomery was Ensign Travis Mayweather in Star Trek Enterprise. And I've tweeted at celebrities, but they don't always tweet back, so that's, it's not the greatest. But it's pretty interesting and neat that you can have access to these people in this digital age, the age of social media. I haven't had any really majorly significant interactions with celebrities on a personal basis, like hey, let's go hang out and have a coffee at the coffee shop, William Shatner or Diane Sawyer or somebody. It's like some famous person. I haven't. I guess if I really think about it, the first interaction I had with a minor celebrity was back in Sault Ste. Marie. I might have been 8 or 9 years old, and local newscaster Carl Sapkowski, I think he did the sports or the weather or something on the news back in the day, and we were in the IGA grocery store, and I said to my mom, "Hey, is that Carl Sapkowski?" I couldn't even say his last name; it was so hard to say. And my brother Curtis was like, "That's not him," and my mom says, "It is him." And my brother still didn't believe it, so I took Curtis over there, and I said to the guy, I said, "Are you Carl Sapkowski?" And he's like, "Yes, I am." And I said, "I told you." And Curtis was like, "Wow." And then I watched the news for like 2 weeks after to see if he would talk about that interaction on the news, but he never did. So that was very sad in my young life. But that was my first brief brush with semi-fame. And I guess that's really all the celebrity interactions that I've had. The celebrities, minor personalities, major personalities, people that I've seen in concert, that kind of thing. At the Alanis Morissette concert, I saw Our Lady Peace, and I can't remember who else. But nothing too exciting or major. No hangouts. The best interaction I've had so far has been with Larry Nemechek, and that's pretty awesome. And Robert J. Sawyer's conversation was pretty cool, and so was Sina Grace's. If you guys know any famous people that you would like to get on the podcast, hook us up. That would be awesome. I'd love to have some more celebrity interactions. That's great. Have you had a celebrity interaction you'd like to share? Why don't you let us know here at the podcast? You can just give us a quick email, soulforgepodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at soulforgepod. If you do email us, you can either just write it out, or you can send like an audio clip, and I'd love to play it on the show. That would be pretty cool. So this has been another episode of the Soul Forge podcast, which I appreciate you coming by and listening to. I hope you enjoyed the interview that I did with Larry. It was a longer episode, but well worth it, I think. And if you check out his podcast, let us know here and what you think of it. I guess that's it for this episode. I don't have much more to say. I just hope you enjoyed it. Tell all your friends about the podcast, and hope you have a great rest of your week. And remember, inside of you is the potential to make yourself better. And that is what it is to be human, to make yourself more than you are. This has been another episode of the Soul Forge Podcast. Contact the show by emailing soulforgepodcast@gmail.com or by tweeting soulforgepod on Twitter. Visit us at soulforgepodcast.com, and remember, the best way to show your support is by leaving a 5-star review in the iTunes Store. And, if you would, please check us out and like us on Facebook. The Soul Forge Podcast was written, produced, scored, edited, engineered, and directed by Sean Vanderloo. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Darth Vaderloo. For more great content, you can listen to my other podcast, The Rusted Robot. Thanks for stopping by the Forge. We'll keep the fires lit until your next visit.
I could do this all day.
This has been a Valley of Vanderloo podcast production, all rights reserved.
This transmission ends now.